第一场研讨会正式开始，恭请东吴大学法律学系副系主任宫文祥副教授前来主持。
OK， 好，我先用中文支持一下，讲话一下这个今天很高兴能够受邀来主持第一场这个研讨会。那这个感谢这个曾金秀老师，那当然也感谢法师还有我们理事长高老师这个通力的一个合作。因为这场研讨会其实很盛大，那尤其是陈清友老师是我的大学老师，我每次都要强调，所以老师交代我来主持，我就一定要来主持。虽然我早上本来应该在北市府有书院会了，那这个所以今天有幸来，当然也是可以来学习了。那也在还没有进入到英文致辞的英文开场前呢，我想也先跟各位说明一下，今天第一场有2个这个 keynote speakers， 就是待会儿两位学者，这是从这个意大利来跟比利时来的，其实大家可以去，甚至可以 Google 一下他们相关资料。其实来了台湾很多次，那对于台湾在这个宗教自由上面，其实也着力很深，甚至提出了一些这个司法改革的一个建言。所以今天真的是很荣幸能够邀请到这2位这个西方的学者、西方的专家。OK， 好，我现在可能要转到英文开场。OK， 好，Ladies and gentlemen, sincerely welcome all of you attending the conference today. Held by the Center of the Law and Religion in Suzhou University School of Law. For the very first session of today's conference, we have 2 keynote speakers, which means that our main host, Professor Qin-Xiu Chen, and also coordinator as well. For this meeting, Professor Chen takes quite a serious attitude to make this kind of arrangement. As the chair of the first session, the job for the moderator, for myself, is to make sure we can finish in time. We can make sure we should make sure finish this session in time. Therefore, for my colleagues in this panel, please be reminded because of the time limit. Each one only has 20 minutes for your presentation. So for our first topic, titled as the relationship between the politics and the religion. So 各位可以看那个手册，我们第一个这个 topic 是这个政治与宗教关系啊。So Dr. Massimo Introvigne, even though I 就在会前我有跟这个 Dr. Massimo 去请教这个 last name 要怎么 pronounce 还是念不出来，so I'm so sorry for the pronunciation. Okay. So Dr. Massimo Introvigne, I quote from the Wikipedia, is an entire Roman Catholic sociologist of religion and intellectual property attorney. He is a founder and the managing director of the Center for the Study in New Religions, which has been described as the highest profile lobbying and information group for the controversial religions. Dr. Massimo, one of the major names in the study of the new religion, has visited Taiwan several times and has been Taiwan's friend for a long time. So today, it's our honor to have Dr. Massimo Introvigne here. So Dr. Massimo Introvigne, I give the floor to you. So let us welcome Dr. Massimo.
Can you hear me? Yes. Working. Okay. So states have traditionally adopted different models for controlling religions, and they try to control some religion they label as cults. Now, scholars of religion in the West normally do not use the word cults because it's considered offensive and derogatory and not politically correct. So we do not use the word cults, we use the word new religious movements. Of course, that doesn't mean that all new religious movements are nice and bring peace, love, and flowers. So we also use criminal religious movements for movements committing crimes, but the word cults is very ambiguous and only creates confusion. Notwithstanding this attitude prevailing in the academia, there are private lobbies that conduct campaigns and try to persuade the state to fight groups labeled as cults, and also some states have anti-cult policies for reasons of their own. We are in a very interesting period of time to discuss this topic because of the war in Ukraine. Most anti-cult private organizations in Europe and indeed in the world are under an umbrella organization called FECRIS, and headquartered in France and funded by the French government. The gentleman you say on the right has been for many, many years vice president of FECRIS and is still a member of the board. It's a Russian Orthodox theologian called Alexander Dvorkin. The problem is the anti-cultists in Russia have emerged as very vocal supporters of Russia in the war of aggression against Ukraine, and indeed they supported the anti-Ukrainian position of Putin before and contributed the argument that is false, but it's propaganda, of course, that Ukraine is a country whose culture and governments are dominated by the cults. So because of this situation, all of a sudden the names of the Russian affiliates disappeared from the FECRIS website between March 31st and April 5, 2022, but that doesn't mean that the contacts between FECRIS and Russia have been terminated. And to make the situation worse, several scholars have investigated not only the connection of FECRIS with Russia, but also the connections of FECRIS with mainland China, where Western anti-cultists have visited often and supported the Chinese repression of Falun Gong and other new religious movements. So here you see a dinner of FECRIS with anti-cultists from different parts of the world in Paris. And the topic of my paper, I'm a sociologist, is how anti-cultism as the ideology, falsely from the point of view of academic studying religion, differentiating between religions and cults, follows different models in different countries. But that doesn't mean that on some issues they cannot cooperate or share nice dinners together. In 1993, that shows I'm old enough, I introduced the distinction between a counter-cult and an anti-cult movement. The counter-cult movement has existed for 2,000 years, and it's the attitude, particularly by Christians, but also by Muslims and Jews, and perhaps other religions, to label as heresies the groups which are regarded as not orthodox. And that, of course, is part of religion, since religion exists. But in the late 20th century, something new appeared, and that's the anti-cult as opposed to the counter-cult movement. And the anti-cult movement claims to be secular and to use secular arguments against the so-called cult. So, different models. The first and the oldest model is the American model. Of course, in the United States, there was a robust Christian countercult movement, but normally didn't ask the state or the courts to do anything. They were happy to deliver sermons or publish books against the heretics. But in the late 1960s, what happened together with the hippie revolution in the United States is a number of college students decided to drop out of the college and to work as full-time missionaries for the Korean Unification Church or become monks and nuns for the Indian Hare Krishna movement or to join other groups. So, of course, the parents were not happy, and they didn't find that the theological criticism by the counter-cult Christian movement was enough. So they found a convenient explanation of why their children had joined such strange groups in the theory of brainwashing. Now, brainwashing was a political concept. The name had been coined by the CIA, the American intelligence, in its propaganda operation against China during the Cold War. But some anti-cult psychologists, including Margaret Singer, you see here, took this concept from politics and applied it to religion, saying there is a distinction between religion. Religion tries to persuade you with rational arguments, while cults use this mysterious technique of brainwashing to compel you to convert. Now, if you are brainwashed, you cannot be rationally persuaded to go back to your old ways, but you should be counter-brainwashed. And so a gentleman who is still alive, but 90-year-old, Ted Patrick, who was a bureaucrat for the state of California, he was not a scholar or a psychologist, invented something called deprogramming, meaning people were adult members of new religions were kidnapped in the streets and detained in secluded places and bombarded with negative information about the cults until they were deconverted. As the study of late sociologist Andy Shoup demonstrated, cooperating with the programmers was a structural feature of the American anti-cult movements, but deprogramming and a number of problems. For instance, there were cases of deprogrammers raping the female members of cults they were trying to deprogram, and so American courts in the 1990s made deprogramming illegal. Now, sociologically and conceptually, it is unclear why the anti-cultists say brainwashing is bad, but deprogramming is good, because it seems it's the same strategy in their mind. Of course, scholars do not believe brainwashing exists at all, but the difference, according to the anti-cultists, was not in the method, but in the aim. Because brainwashing leads you to make a wrong choice, and deprogramming leads you to what they believe it's a good choice. And that leads us to different idea of freedom. The American model of anti-cultist, which is a private model because the state never endorsed it. There are no anti-cult laws or governmental institution in the United States. On the contrary, the state often defends new religious movements when they are persecuted abroad. So it's a private model, and it's based on an individualistic late 20th or 21st century ideas of freedom, meaning you are only free if you keep your autonomy. if you give a part of your autonomy to a religion, you surrender a part of your freedom voluntarily. Yours is not a genuine choice, it's a bounded choice, as they say, and you have been brainwashed. So you can believe you are happy and free, but the anti-cultists know better than you, and so they can rescue you by violence if needed and make you free again. So that's the American model, which is a private model. The state does not intervene, but it relies on private association and the media. Now for something completely different, we have the Chinese model. China developed since the 7th century CE the expression "se jiao," and we know exactly who coined the expression "se jiao." It was a Tang Taoist courtier called Fu Yi, and he was against Buddhism. And he used this expression against Buddhism, and "se jiao," which were later punished with the death penalty, means heterodox movements who opposed the emperor and used black magic to convert their followers. So today, "se jiao" is translated as evil cults, but that's an anachronistic translation. And I have discussed in conference with Chinese Marxist scholars, and later they published a declaration which mentions conversations with me, and now their proposal is we do not translate "se jiao" as we do not translate Qigong or Kung Fu. We should simply say "se jiao," let's not translate it. And black magic, of course, as one of the features of "se jiao, now has been replaced by brainwashing, which, as a Chinese scholar Gu Yongping has suggested, is just a modern version of black magic. And that's surprising because brainwashing, as I told you, was a word coined by the American intelligence to slander China in the 1950s. Brainwashing was something the bad Chinese were doing, but now brainwashing is used in China to attack the "se jiao." In China today, there is an article of the Chinese Criminal Code, Article 300, making being active in a "se jiao" crime. But there is a long tradition in China of criminalizing the "se jiao. The more complete law are in the Ming Dynasty, and then they continue. "Se jiao" were criminalized in communist China and in Taiwan during the martial law period, and there are some remnants of it, for instance, in the attitude of the National Taxation Bureau in Taiwan, as proved by the Taijimen case some of you may be familiar with. So the Chinese system does not protect, like the American system protects a certain idea of freedom of the individual, which is an ideological idea. The Chinese system protects the state against groups accused of not supporting it. Now, a third and also different model is the Russian model. And of course, these models interact. I mentioned Alexander Dworkin, and here is Alexander Dworkin, the chief Russian anti-cultist, lecturing in China. So these people cooperating with each other. In Russian, the bad word for cult is secta, but it's sect in French, or sect in Italian. So it should be translated as cult, not as sect, because in English sect is not such a bad word. So the bad word is cult in English and is sect in French or secta in Russian. So in Russia, there are laws which allows for what they call totalitarian cults or be liquidated as extremist organization. And based on these laws, for example, the Jehovah's Witnesses have been liquidated, and now being a Jehovah's Witnesses make you land in jail in Russia. And the category of extremism in Russia was introduced after 9/11. So everybody agreed, even foreigners say, of course, they should protect themselves from Islamic terrorism. But then this law was expanded 2 times, and now it is regarded as extremism to argue that your worldview is superior to others, which of course is something all religions do. It doesn't apply to the Eastern Orthodox, to the Russian Orthodox Church, but if you argue that your religion is better than the Russian Orthodox Church, you are an extremist, even if, like the Jehovah's Witnesses, you are totally peaceful and not violent. And the other tool used in Russia is the so-called Yarovaya law. Here you see Irina Yarovaya, who is now the Speaker of the Duma, complimented by Putin after her law was passed. And the Yarovaya law is a law against proselytization, meaning you cannot try to convert a Russian citizen who is a member of the Russian Orthodox Church or in some geographical area of the other traditional religion like Islam in Chechnya or Buddhism in Kalmykia to another religion. But if you are the Russian Orthodox Church, you may try to convert a Catholic or a Buddhist to Orthodoxy. That is allowed. But what is not allowed is convert a Russian Orthodox to a different religion. So what does the Russian model protect? It protects the Russian Orthodox Church, which has a symbiotic relation and a deal with the Putin regime. The Putin regime protects the Russian Orthodox Church against competition. The Russian Orthodox Church organizes the consensus for the Putin regime. Finally, in conclusion, there is a different model, and that's the French model. France, since the French Revolution, has a very specific notion called laïcité. And English-speaking scholars have struggled how to translate it and decided secularism, secularity, nothing is good. So again, it should be left in French, laïcité. And laïcité, as Dutch scholar Wouter Hanegraaff, whose birthday is today, I discovered, has demonstrated, is the idea that irrationalism is something against the values of the French Revolution and the Republic, is very bad, and you can be irrational in your own home, but if you organize irrationalism in a public forum, the state should repress you. And I skip for the sake of brevity, but French anti-cultists really believe all religions are potentially cults, only for strategic reasons we cannot find all of them. So the difference of the French model is it does not rely, like in Russia, on the Orthodox Church. It does not rely, like in the United States, on private deprogramming, but it relies on the government itself. There is an anti-cult governmental agency called Miviludes, which is fighting cultic deviances. And now, in France, the new name of the game is separatism. There is a new law against separatism or separatism. And what is separatism? To organize separate communities with different values from the majorities, and this is used against Islam, but also against the so-called cults. So here you see my summary, 4 different models. They do not protect the same thing, but they cooperate between themselves. So my distinction is not rigid, and we could add other models In Israel, for instance, there is a strange cooperation between atheists and ultra-religious Jews against conversion. In Japan, after the Abe assassination, there is a variation of the Chinese model, and so on. But I maintain that there are differences, and my four models might help understand what is going on in the world anti-cult community, including after the war in Ukraine and after the new threats of China against Taiwan. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Massimo Introvigne, for your excellent talk and quite interest. I think especially for its depth and the breadth in your topic. I think it's true. I think it is quite an important issue, and it should be the prerequisite issue we need to answer to. How to define religion, especially from the secular perspective. So it's very exciting to have your speech, and we can learn from different perspectives to understand how to protect religion before we understand what the religion is. OK， 谢谢这个 Dr. Massimo。那其实我想说这样的安排其实正好，因为以我作为下午的报告人，当我们在写题目的时候，我们当然其实一开始会有意无意的会回避到底宗教是什么，然后就只会直接进入到宗教自由的一个讨论。所以今天第一场这样的一个这个演讲，真的是我想说虽然是个主持人，但其实学习到很多。OK， 好，这当然有点多言了，有点多言，应该我时间有限，不过还是要回应一下刚刚那个法师在一开始有提到的法律跟宗教之间的关系哦。我以前在做学生的时候，我的指导老师陈真生大法官，他其实有跟我们说过，如果你要学这个国家的法律，其实你可能连他的宗教法都必须要学。那也因为我就没有去德国了，因为老师是留德的，他认为说你要学，当然因为在场有很多法律的先进哦，那当然是有点造次。不过就因为当初陈老师是有这样特别去提到，就是说如果你要学会真的掌握到德国法，那可能德国的那个宗教法其实是必须要去学习的。OK， 好，一样我这次多言了。